Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Carter DeLoro. I'm from New York City. I went to Pomona College for undergrad, and I worked in admissions at Pomona and Occidental. I've been a school-based counselor across New England and the Midwest, and I'm currently the co-director of college counseling at the Marymount School of New York.
I'm Mark Stucker, and I'm the founder and producer. Our mission is to make college knowledge available to all. We care deeply about your kid. We believe college is a match to be made and not a prize to be won. We believe in being genuine and transparent. We are committed to covering a variety of topics, including the tough subjects. Thanks to your generosity, we're committed to providing a minimum of 10 hours of fresh, commercial-free content every month, with episodes every Monday and Thursday. We have a variety of co-hosts because we believe and value diverse perspectives. You're our listening family, and we get great joy every time we meet with you, as we do our best to give you tools so your students can soar and reach their limitless potential. Good morning, friends. On today's episode, we'll have part 2 of Carter and I debating what is in the best interest of students for their mental health when it comes to our advice for them around college counseling. And then we'll have part 2, Understanding Clemson. But before we do, several announcements. So we actually have 6 events coming up. Now, let me just give you a little bit of a history of our events. So we actually did our first live event like in the middle of 2024 in Raleigh, North Carolina. And then I did 3 events in Los Angeles. I did a San Diego event. Susan joined me right around the NatCat conference 2024 in Santa Monica for an event. We did an event in Fremont. We did an event in Fremont, California as well. And then last year I did 4 events in Texas. Did an Austin event, did a San Antonio event, did a Dallas event, and a Central Texas event. And then we did 5 events in total because Hillary, Kate, and Grace Roberts and Lloyd from Grinnell, they all did a big event, just outside of Boulder, between Boulder and Denver on case studies. So it's been a while since we've had an event, but we're coming out with a bunch of them. And I just want to give you an update. So if any of these are of interest to you, you can sign up. So the big daddy is going to be around the NatCat conference, and that is October 6th in Minneapolis. And I'll tell you, that is really, really coming together nicely because for that event, we're going to have a panel. Susan will be there. Carter's still trying to make it. I'll be there. But then we have VP of Enrollment, Adam Miller from Whitman, Andy Strickler, Dean of Admission, and Anthony Berry, Director of Admission at Trinity College in Hartford. All of us will be on a panel, and parents and students can ask questions. There'll be light refreshments. The way these usually work is like 30 minutes of light refreshments and mingling, and then an hour Q&A, and then we call it a day, and we stay behind a little bit in case somebody has, wants to interact with us. But no PowerPoint, no big presentation. Not a big deal if you saunter in a little bit late or have to leave a little bit early because the time doesn't perfectly work for you. So that's going to be Tuesday, October 6th, right in Minneapolis. And then 5 days later, we're doing 2 events in one day. All right, friends, then 5 days later, we're doing 2 events in one day. That's right, 2 events. So Matt Kohler, he's a director of college counseling at Madison Country Day School. And so he reached out to me about hosting an event. And Madison Country Day is not in Madison, Wisconsin, though. It's in Waunakee, Wisconsin, which is not that far from Madison. So that's going to be a noon event. If you're in the greater Madison area or Chicago or Wisconsin or anywhere, come on down. We'd love to see you. It's going to be fun. So that's at 12. And then right after that event, I'll shoot right to Milwaukee for a dinner event. Jennifer Mandel, who works with me at School Match Review, she will be kind of hosting, or at least they say she was a leader in putting this whole thing together, will be at Cafe Benelux. And that's right on North Broadway Street, Cafe Benelux. We should have a nice meal, enjoy each other's company. Should be a lot of fun. And then the very next day, Donna Mezzi will be joining me, who's also a college counselor in Greater Chicago. That event is right on Lakeshore Drive. Yep, 1100 North Lakeshore Drive. That's the evening, 6 p.m. on the 12th of Chicago. All those Chicago listeners. And then the very next day, we're out in the suburbs in Hinsdale, Illinois on the 13th. That's at 5523 South Monroe Street. Yadir Enrique, one of our listeners, reached out. Thanks for organizing and coordinating that. So yeah, those are all events. They're all on your collegebounkid.com under the events page. It's a lot of fun meeting listeners. It totally inspires you. Makes you want to go back and get to work on preparing more episodes. And so kind of like throwing a log of fire on your on the fire. That's what it's like to meet listeners. So if you're anywhere near there, we'd love to see you. All right, friends, it's a YouTube update time. So I'm trying to get in the habit of letting you know when we have a YouTube video. It's between now and the next episode, briefly what they are. And there's 2 this week. And Andy Strickler makes his first appearance on YouTube. And it's a complete and total deep dive. It went almost an hour. And I want to tell you a little bit about it, because if you've never checked out our YouTube channel, I really would encourage you to check out this video with Andy Strickler. To me, it's one of the more important topics. It's misunderstood. How do colleges find students? Like, how do they find them? Have you ever thought about that? You got to fill a class. You got to get 500 kids in your incoming class. How do you find students? We're doing a complete deep dive on that. Really, to tell you the truth, I did 2 deep dives with Andy Strickler. Both are close to an hour. And this is part 1 of 2. And we're focusing on student search and how every imaginable question you could think of about search, right? That's what colleges buy lists of names to target people. How many names do they buy? Okay, we're going to talk about that. When they buy lists of names, what criteria are they allowed to use when buying names? What are the things they can use? What are the things that they can't use? If as a student, I'm getting a lot of mail from colleges, does that mean I'm going to be admitted or probably going to be admitted? And he answers all these questions and many more. Is it better to do email? Is it better to do snail mail? Like we get into all of that stuff. And, Andy is his normal self. Straight shooting, not holding any punches. In fact, next thing I want you to hear is a 40-second clip from Tuesday's video with Andy Strickler. It'll go live tomorrow if you're listening on Monday. If you're listening Tuesday, it's already up probably. Take a listen. So you know how you said there's not a school in the country that doesn't want more applications?
Correct.
I could see someone saying, why? Why does every school want more applications? I know that's so foundational, but we have different people of all different places in where they are in their learning curve here, Andy.
Right.
Explain why every school wants more apps.
We have this weird notion in American society that somehow more selective means better.
Yeah.
I run into students, occasionally run into students who will be really honest with me. And these are students that I've met through other walks of life who probably are not that interested in Connecticut College, which then frees up a level of honesty in our conversations, which I really appreciate. And they will admit, like, I care about selectivity. I want to go to a school with the lowest admit rate because it is a perception that the school is, quote unquote, a better school, a better academic school.
The other thing I want to share about YouTube is this. We keep trying to improve. We keep listening. I don't want to make it sound like I always just listen because sometimes I do push back. But had a listener reach out to me this week, never misses an episode, and right back from 2018 when we started. And they kind of surprised me because they said I refuse to watch anything on YouTube. I was like, you? You refuse to watch anything on YouTube? Not you. And they said, yeah, I just don't like closed captioning. They said, I just don't like it when the manuscript goes across the screen. Now, I said to the listener, I've had so many people tell me they like that. I really have. And I said, I also did research on it before we decided to do it. And I said, I personally like it. You're the first person to tell me that you don't like it. So, but then they said something. They said, do you know that if you use YouTube's closed captioning, you can have your cake and eat it too? Because the people that like it can have it. And the people that don't like it can just turn off closed captioning and you will get this manuscript running across the screen. I was like, oh, snap. That's an easy solution. So that is supposed to be going into effect with the Andy Strickler video on Tuesday. So if you're one of the people that don't like to see the words on the screen, you can just click turn it off. If you're one of the people that do like it, leave it on. So hopefully that makes, the experience better for you. And so that's Tuesday's video. And on Wednesday's video, Christina and Susan and me, we're all there and we're doing another grind in my gears. And we're talking about passion projects. So that's Tuesday and that's Wednesday. If you're enjoying YouTube or you want to check out YouTube. If you haven't, strongly encourage you to check out at least that Andy Strickler video, because I really think it's important that all of our listeners have a real deep understanding of student search, and that's a YouTube exclusive. All right, friends, we are going to transition to the debate part 2 with Carter. But before we do, there's a couple things that I want to share. I never had any debates with co-hosts. Well, I had one with Lisa about 6 years ago. That was kind of a knockdown, drag-out one, whether over colleges or businesses or not. I remember that one. But we hadn't had a debate in about 6 years. And I'm like, how come we're having all these debates all of a sudden? I can assure you they're not performative. This is not Shannon Sharp and Skip Bayless and Stephen A. Smith saying, we got to rile people up and act like we hate LeBron and get clicks. No, we just don't do that stuff. We just honestly have some disagreements. So the reason why, I think, is because we have 5 more videos a week now. That's a lot of content to be talking with coasts. And sometimes you're going to find that you agree, and sometimes you're going to find you disagree. Now, I would say 90% of the time, even when we disagree, we actually agree on more than we disagree, but just there's a little bit of disagreement. So I have a debate coming up on YouTube with Susan. I have a debate coming up with Hillary on YouTube. If you listen to the Christina video on do you need to submit the FAFSA, we agreed mostly, but there were some points we didn't agree on there. And also, Christina and I have one on net price calculators coming up where we mostly agree, but there's a little disagreement. And for some reason, Hillary said something that it's so simple and so profound, but for some reason it was like an aha moment. After the end of our debate, I said, Hillary, we've actually never had a disagreement like that. You'll have to hear it. It has to do with colleges not showing a dorm room on tour. So it's going to be over there on YouTube coming up. And colleges, not being able to schedule tours when you need to get a tour. So that's kind of the general subtext. I'll have to let you listen to hear more details. But at the very end, I said to Hillary, I've never really had a disagreement with her like that. She said this. I thought it was pretty profound. She said, well, we're different people. We're not always going to agree on everything. Duh. Like, that's so obvious, right? I don't know why that was like, oh yeah, profound. But Carter and I've had 2. Everyone else I've had one with. Well, Chris, I forgot. I had one with Chris as well. One with Chris, one with Susan, one with Hillary. I guess you could call it a little bit of one with Christina, mild disagreements, and one with Hillary. Carter is this debate, and then Carter and I really did have a pretty good debate. It's coming up. It hasn't aired yet. It'll be on YouTube on demonstrated interest. But I just want to say a few things. Like, I really love talking with Carter. I love how his mind works. I love his intelligence. I love the fact that he's not afraid to voice his opinion. I love that he always does it in such a collegial way. And, 90% of the time, even when we disagree, we respect the other person's opinion. The one thing about Carter is he has one North Star, and that's, is it in the best interest of kids? And that's it. And so that gives him a really unique vantage point. This is just my opinion, but sometimes I feel like I look at things from the standpoint of what's going to work for the school, for a college, and for the student. Because if it only works for the student, the college might have to close, or it might be a shell of itself if it has to close a whole bunch of departments. So sometimes that gives us slightly different vantage points. I think that's true in our YouTube debate. On this one, I just think that we agreed more than we disagreed, but we did have, a few different points where we saw some things differently. After we aired part 1, I had the thought, Carter did literally an amazing job. I really believe that, in how he summarized the article that Brennan wrote on maxing. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you probably need to go back and listen to our last episode. This isn't going to make a lot of sense because this is part 2 of a debate that started last week. But I thought, you know what? The article's not that long. Let me read the article because I think if you hear it yourself, you'll get more out of the conversation that Carter and I have. So here we go. It's called College Admissions Maxing, a Troubling Trend. Brennan Barnard, contributed Forbes. It went live on August 1st of this month, 2026. All right, here we go. Maxing. It's all the rage in 2026. Looks maxing, protein maxing, now even tan maxing. One need not look beyond the local gym where creatine-infused young people incessantly flex in front of the mirror. The shelves of the local grocery store are stocked with supplemental boosted sparkling water, coffee, ketchup, marshmallows, and popcorn. If it's edible, they're probably adding protein to it. In the latest social media trend, the quest for the darkest tan has people foregoing sunscreen and seeking peak ultraviolet ray exposure. Maxing involves individuals ignoring the potentially harmful consequences of their actions in pursuit of unrealistic and often thwarted ideals of self-improvement. It is within this culture of optimization and the mentality that more is better that students arrive at the college admissions experience, and it shows. Applicants mistakenly believe that they need to do everything and be everything to be admitted to college. It's not surprising given the adage in journalism, if it bleeds, it leads, where sensational stories dominate the space, exploiting the fears and insecurities of young people and their supporters at a vulnerable time of transition. The headlines often focus on uber-selective colleges and universities, the length students and parents will go to access them, and the parts of the process of applying that evoke the most anxiety. Social media is riddled with advertisements for companies and consultants promising the secret formulas to maximize odds of admission. The reality is that college admissions can be joyful, simple, and fulfilling, a celebration of one's strengths and values as they are, and not how society tells them they should be. In truth, admission professionals are not seeking flawless, excessive resumes from superhuman applicants. In fact, these applications often land as inauthentic and induce eye-rolling from those reviewing them. Rather, colleges are hoping to admit students who have found meaning in what they do and are ready to engage and contribute to a vibrant campus community. Yet increasingly, young people are application maxing. As a counselor, I see this optimization play out with students in two primary ways. In an attempt to best position themselves for acceptance, they default to misguided cultural hype and social media advice about the need to publish research, secure an impressive internship, and stack classes and extracurricular activities so high that they leave little room to be teenagers. Meanwhile, students build application lists that often exceed 20 schools. They fail to do the hard work of research and discernment around an intentional and balanced list of colleges and universities that would be a good match for their strengths and interests. Instead, increasingly, students throw in applications to a long list of reach schools. This spray and pray approach to admission relies on faulty math, that the more colleges, the better the odds of acceptance. This is not how selective college admissions works. Ultimately, they end up only maxing the extra work on applications and supplements and in the end, the amount of disappointment about decision outcomes. I asked admission leaders to reflect on the trends they see as they work with prospective students and what they would like to see change. Here's what they had to say. Jordan Pasacucci, Vice Dean and Director of Admissions at UPenn, explains the trend I would like to see take hold is students upholding integrity by celebrating who they really are. She adds, the advice out there and the application format itself suggests that big moments, the award stage moments, are what get rewarded. But that isn't true. The students who stand out right from a place of gratitude for who they already are and excitement for who they are becoming, Pascucci says. That comes from paying attention to the ordinary moments, the hallway moments, when no one is watching, and finding ways to include that perspective into your application. Matthew Hyde, Vice President and Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid at Trinity College, agrees, saying, I would love for all college aspirants to know that they are enough as they are. He points out that optimization of process, practice, and leveraging of resources, including time and human capital, is an important concept to value. but says the idea of maxing self and outward reflections of perceived success makes me sad. Certainly for humans that imprison themselves with their reaches for perfection, but also for humanity, Hyde argues, we are supposed to be messy and imperfect. There's strength, character, and joy to be found when we fully embrace our messiness and prioritize our happiness, he adds. I would love for more of the teenager species to be less concerned about how others perceive them and more in tune with their search for self and how exceptional they already are and can continue to be. He tells students, zero value should be assigned to others' assessment of you. Their desires to judge, opine, and degrade are unfortunate, but also an expression of their weakness. He admits that he is an idealist with a proverbial glass that is usually overflowing, but says, I feel strongly that individuals have control of their attitude, spirit, and the efforts they make to be a good human. And the sharpness of one's jawline, the glow to one's skin, the prestige of one's college has absolutely no bearing on one's presence as a healthy and productive human. Peter Wilson, Dean of the College Admissions, Associate Vice President, Enrollment, Student Advancement at the University of Chicago, has a great way of framing admission for applicants. He says, rather than admissions maxing, students should be interest maxing. Take the classes because the description sounded good. Keep your summer job. Stay in the band that isn't going to produce a platinum record. Spend time and have fun with your friends. Those unscheduled hours are where students actually stumble into what they love and practice curiosity. He adds, when a student writes and talks about something they genuinely care about, it comes through in their application. Students who practice and learn genuine curiosity and show it throughout their application versus trying to complete a checklist they think colleges want to see. Those are the ones who truly thrive at places like the University of Chicago. Jennifer Wallace is best-selling author of Never Enough, When Achievement Culture Becomes Toxic, and What Can We Do About It? And Mattering, The Secret to a Life of Deep Connection and Purpose. When asked about maximizing trends in college admission, she says, optimization has become so seductive because it seems to promise certainty. If I take one more AP class or perfect one more part of myself, then maybe I'll finally be enough. She points out that the admission process has unintentionally reinforced the idea that young people must earn their worth. What students need instead is the confidence that they are already enough and have something unique to contribute, Wallace adds. Parents and schools can reinforce the idea that they are valued for who they are, not just what they do, by getting a PhD in them, getting to know them for who they are deep inside, their strengths, their talents, and contributions that are uniquely theirs. She explains that in this way, parents and educators play a critical role to convince the young people of their worth outside of a system that tells them that they need to earn it. What they need are adults who remind them that they matter because of who they are at their core, the friend they encourage, the teammate they support, the curiosity they bring. Wallace advises that one way parents and schools can dial down the pressure is by changing the questions they ask. Instead of, how did you do on the test, ask, where did you make a difference today? She says, what we ask young people about signals what we value. When we shift our questions and attention, we move students away from feeling like they have to prove their worth toward recognizing their impact. This shifts offers from a far healthier foundation for both well-being and long-term success. As for unchecked college list maxing, Tony Cabasco, Vice President of Enrollment at Colorado College, advises students to take a step back and be more thoughtful about their college lists. He says, this can be challenging because admissions decisions seem more random and erratic to them. The answer is a short list of colleges and focusing on what truly interests them, he adds. It's much easier to thoughtfully discern and articulate why 10 colleges may be better fit than applying to 20. As an extreme example, Cabasco says, I had a mom admit that her daughter applied to 66 colleges. Going to the gym, eating protein, or even enjoying the glow of a healthy summer tan are all well and good when done with intention and moderation. Likewise, taking challenging courses, engaging in summer research, interning in an area of interest, pursuing an extracurricular activity deeply can all be meaningful endeavors. So too are holding a summer job, taking care of a younger sibling or elderly grandparent, and being involved in clubs, sports, or performance at school. These are all part of being a good high school student and an indication of commitment to one's personal growth. The scale tips to unhealthy, however, when taken to extremes. Some students and families feel like they have to pay for expensive summer programs or other experiences that they perceive will give them a leg up in college admissions. Others rush from activity to activity, leaving little room to relax together as a family, to sleep, or just sit and read a good book. Being a compelling college applicant is not about presenting an appearance of having maxed out every facet of life. Those who are successful in admissions tell a story, not of how much they can do and be, but of what is important to them, who they are in a community, and how they honor their curiosity. All right, I just thought it'd be helpful for you to hear the whole article. And now you'll hear the final part of my debate with Carter DeLauro on what's in the best interest of students. Is this article giving students good advice or not good advice? And is there nuance in there? Listen and enjoy.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
I have worked with quite a few kids at Phillips Exeter, which is one of the most prestigious boarding schools in the country. And so many of them are dissatisfied with their college options. They thought, oh, I went to Phillips Exeter. Like all of a sudden, like it comes with an expectation of, you know, I'm going to a certain kind of school. And so like, I don't want that to be the solution either, that like you just validate, like that's not the solution, is just validate what people's preconceived fears are. And because a lot of times that doesn't work out even if they get it, even if they get it. And so I think that's important. That's part of what I think, you know, Brennan's trying to address, like this whole thing of, I got to do more research. I got, like, you know, you oftentimes hear me talk about that. I got to start my charity. I got to start my nonprofit. I got to get published. I got to do all these things thinking that that's the solution to everything. Mm-hmm. And that a lot of times that does add to the stress, because it is a little bit of a keeping up the Joneses mindset. So I know Brennan enough to know that I would go so far as to say Brennan cares about mental health as much as you and I do, because I've known him since 2003. And so I know that it's not, well, mental health doesn't matter at all. If anything, I actually think he's kind of arguing for mental health.
Sure. Yeah, I see it.
But I think the biggest place I agree with you is it could come off like it was really simple. It's not simple because there's so many forces working against, kind of, in some ways. And I think, you know, you can correct me if this is a mischaracterization. Remember back in the day, like Nancy Reagan, like had this, you know, I think it was Nancy Reagan. There was a whole campaign about like it was drugs, like just stop doing it or something like that. Remember that?
Just say no. Yeah.
That's it. Just say no. Yeah. And I think that's kind of what you're reacting to, is you feel like the article, if you were to distill the article to its core, it's saying to kids, just say no. And you're, yes. Is that fair? Is that fair, Carter? That's what
I think that's totally fair. And in the same way that I think we all look back at that Nancy Reagan campaign as being, you know, ultimately ineffective.
Yes.
Because we clearly still have a massive addiction crisis in this country.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. That while we are empowering individuals to make better choices within the system, that we also have to be looking at the structural things that are leading them to make those choices. They're incentivizing them to make the decisions that they are making, you know. And so, you know, I agree with these ideas that we shouldn't necessarily say that, well, right, like that going to an elite college is a panacea. I know that it's not, but that actually I think is a source of more anxiety for the students, to say that, yeah, you can get into this great school and it still might not secure you because there's not really a way to be secured. And I loved the interview you did with Bill Deresiewicz.
Yeah, Bill Deresiewicz.
Deresiewicz, the author of Excellent Sheep.
Yeah. Good job on his name, by the way. Good job.
Thank you. But, you know, when in that one, you were talking about all the incentives that are leading students towards management and tech and consulting and all of that, and noting that even doctors are starting to be seen as not as desirable of a profession because of the money. And so you're right when you talk here about nursing as being a secure and steady job. But ultimately, I think a lot of students are still subjected to all of this pressure from peers and institutions and all sorts of places that they can't make it financially on salaries like that. And if they are putting all of this effort.
Well, I wouldn't say salaries like that. I would say, I would, because, nurse anesthetists make $200K. It's pretty good. But I would say more that not everybody's going to want to do that. Like they're just not, whether it's for they wouldn't like the job or it doesn't have the status they want, whatever. Like I would say that's legitimate. I was just trying to make the point that if people are really concerned with job security, like the better answer is to go into professions that where the demand so far exceeds the supply. I was talking with, and I know not everybody's going to want to do this, but I was talking to a guy in the Midwest recently, and he was talking about how, what people are doing? They're going to trade school. They're doing this, that. He just laid out a few steps. They're becoming plumbers. They're doing this and then they're like selling their thing for $10 million. And then they're going and, he's just mapping out a whole path of some people that he knows who took a path. Because right now there's like such an oversupply. I mean, the supply demand ratio is way out of whack for plumbers and for some other professions, but we know not everybody's going to want to do that. Right. So, but I was more making the point that if it's really about job security, honestly, it's kind of going where the puck is. But we also know that personal status means a lot to people. And so status is associated with certain job professions. And then also some people like, if you're not going to, a lot of people are like, yeah, but I wouldn't like that. I would hate that. So I didn't want to make it sound that simple. I was just trying to.
Sure. And you're right to call me on that. But I also would say that we know that nursing programs are the most selective programs at some schools, right? Like it still is not easy to get into those. So
let me push back a bit on that. Yeah. If you want to go get a BSN degree at certain schools, but you can take another path. You can get an LPN degree, which is a licensed practical nurse degree. You get these at community colleges. It takes about 1 to 2 years. Then you can go from an LPN to an RN bridge program. That's a registered nurse. You'll come out with an ADN, an associate degree in nursing. And then after that, you can go into a pathway program and go from an RN to a BSN and come out and you're making $100,000 with the BSN degree. You don't have to go through the super competitive process at different colleges. So there are pathways out there. There is a pathway for nursing that doesn't involve getting into the most competitive selective program that a lot of schools offer. Like, once again, I think for most of our listeners, this is probably not what they want to do. Right. And so I'm not trying to say this is the panacea. I just think if someone really tells me I want to be gainfully employed with a really good job, the mindset, well, that means you have to go to this super selective school because that's your answer to that. I'm going to push back on that.
Yeah. And I think that that's correct to do. I think you're right. But at the same time, to say that to somehow, blame the students for the mindset that they're bringing into this, and to say that, just don't optimize, to draw a parallel between looks maxing and applying to college, I do think minimizes the very valid concerns that these students have. And like you're pointing out here, that the education that we can do for our communities to help them see all of these different pathways, this is hard work. It's laborious. It requires so much research for students and families to be able to figure all of this out. And when we were applying to college, it wasn't like that. It wasn't like that at all. And I think that we have to understand and appreciate that things are different, that the incentives are different for these students, and that it is only going to continue getting worse if the best advice we have to offer is just don't worry about it so much.
Yeah, a lot of truth in there. I think, one of the thoughts that's going through my head, this is why I'd rather talk than write. I mean that. No, because like, case in point, like when we're working with a student and it's essay feedback, and I'm not on the essay writing team for my company anymore, but I'm still, oversee it. Like, we like to start out with a meeting with the student once they've done their first draft or in the brainstorming session. And the reason for that is the back and forth that you can have to clarify misunderstandings and things is very different than if you're just responding and writing with something. And I think that's one of the dangers of And I know Brennan too, so I'm probably bringing some of my background of knowing him into this but I think it's fair. So he's trying to stop people from getting caught up in the rat race because of how unhealthy that is mentally. Mm-hmm. And I don't think he would say it's really that simple. Just say no. I really don't believe he feels that way. But sometimes in an article where you try to put an emphasis on something like, well, you found out somebody went to Brown summer program and now you think you need to pay $12,000 to go to Brown summer program? No, you don't, is what he's saying. And you don't have to do that actually.
But the student is looking at just someone that they know that did that and had it work out, and they're hearing all these messages, and then for us to just come in and say, like, don't believe your eyes and ears, it's not true. Mm-hmm. Like we need something more than that. To help students actually believe the advice that we're giving them.
No, so your point is a couple of things. One, it's more simple than just say no, and which we agree on.
More difficult.
Yeah. Sorry. Thank you for catching that. More difficult than just saying no. We agree. And your second point is, correct me if I'm wrong, like, you can't just tell someone like, go out on the basketball, court and I want to see you make 5 left-hand layups in a game. Like, somebody needs to like work with them and show them how to do a left-hand layup. Like you need to give people skills to get from point A to point B, then just tell them that this would be a good thing for you to do. Is that fair or not?
No, I think that's fair. I think that's fair. It's hard. Like, the students that work with us and with other dedicated college counselors around the country and around the world, like they're lucky that they have, people whose jobs it is to help them navigate this process. Many students who aspire to these institutions don't have that. And even the people that do get to work with people like us still, it takes so much effort, so much time, every single part of their high school process, they're wondering, what's the college going to think? And, and they don't even necessarily know what the college is yet sometimes, right? But they are thinking, should I take this class or that class? Should I devote more time to this thing that I love, or should I bring my grades up and drop it, right? Like,
right. So another one of your points is this is a real Byzantine complex process, and it's unrealistic to expect people to sort of know how to navigate it without stress, because it really is stressful because it's complex.
Yeah,
I think,
absolutely.
is that fair?
Yeah,
and I'll tell you another point that I hear from what you're saying, and I have to give my own evolution with this. And if people have listened to the podcast like you all the way since inception, you might have seen this. Like, early on in the podcast, I felt like I was a little almost condescending sometimes at people who wanted to have prestige. I felt like I was like, oh, that's superficial. You shouldn't want that. I felt like that was my messaging. But, anytime something is almost ubiquitous and you see it all the time everywhere, I'm exaggerating a little, but I like to come back and examine like, why is something, so prevalent? And so what I've come to understand is a couple things. One, prestige kind of makes the world go around in a lot of ways. Like, people move into certain neighborhoods, they join certain country clubs, they choose certain they really do. Yeah. And then it's not the what I really came to understand is, like, prestige impacts me too, because the example that I gave was, as much as I say to my kids, do what you want, that's all I care about, I really wouldn't want them to come to me and say, I want to pump gas, Dad. That's what I want to do. Nothing brings me joy like pumping gas. Like, I would be challenging them on that. Yeah. And to be totally honest, and I'm not proud to say this, I'd be like embarrassed to tell everybody, what do your kids do? They pump gas. That's what they do. That would be embarrassing. So, like, I've come to realize some of those feelings, but then even more than that, as I really started examining all the students I work with and why is it that they want all this prestige and why do the parents feel it, I really came to see it more as respect. It's like a proxy for respect. And then I started thinking, don't we all want respect? Everybody does. And you might have even heard me use this example on the podcast before, like, nobody wants to go back to their family, to their school reunion if they're on their 4th marriage, they're unemployed, had multiple bankruptcies, and they put on 150 pounds. They just don't want to go. They don't want to walk into that environment because why? I don't feel like I'm going to get respect. And that's how a lot of peers think. And so, like, me reframing my thinking on that, No, you're never going to get me to the point where I'm going to respect prestige is the only thing that matters. I'm not going to go there. And I'm also not going to be comfortable with prestige matters more than fit or match. I mean, my company's called School Match for You. Everything I do is about fit or match. But for someone to say, I've quoted this on the podcast a few times because it really hit me when a student recently said to me, when I tell somebody where I'm going to college, I want the reaction to be, damn, that girl is smart. And I've come to realize that's how a lot of people think. I need to, that's another way of saying, I respect you. I hope I'm striking the balance here because there's an imbalance there. And as somebody who works with kids all across the country, it's one of the worst places for this is where you are working in New York City. It's very different in New York City. I mean, it's everywhere and it's highly correlated with social class, but it is very different in parts of the Midwest and parts of the Southeast. Not all parts, because it's like the combination of social class with culture combines and does it. I'll tell you a really interesting story. I had somebody I was working with a few years ago, and they put on their we have a parent questionnaire, and they put on the parent questionnaire, they said, I grew up in a world where you go to the most competitive and prestigious college that you can go to, and you spend the rest of your life like name dropping it at every place that you can go. And then the person said, I no longer believe in that. But what I found very interesting was the person who said that grew up in Boston, which is very much that culture. And now they live in another culture, Pacific Northwest, parts of the Pacific Northwest, not even like the heart of like affluent Seattle. That's very different. And I remember saying to myself, I wonder if you would have had that evolution if you would have stayed in Boston. So anyway, I'm saying a lot here. I'd like to know what your thoughts are on any of the stuff that I said there, Carter.
Well, I think you're right. There are pockets where it gets worse, but that's why it's so striking when we get research that shows that this is 2/3 of Americans. This is across the country. This is happening for students, and I worked in high schools in a high school in the Midwest, that was in a prestigious high school. I worked in colleges on the West Coast that were prestigious, right? Like it is everywhere.
It is everywhere.
And
it is more prevalent with wealth, with wealth. Like where you've worked have always been communities of wealth, right? But this is a lot what we're talking. That's oftentimes the college going population. People with college degrees, they want their kids to go to college. College is important to them. It's a lot of our listeners. That's who tunes into a podcast this long. Like that's not, but I just want to point out, like, there is a different mindset versus someone for whom, and no one's gone to college ever in our life, just going to any college would be such a huge success, right? But I think it's important to point that out, but it's also important to say that's still a sizable swath of the country that fits in that.
But I've also worked with students who are first gen, who do come from low income backgrounds, whose parents want them to go to somewhere that's going to lift them. In their minds, like admission to a highly selective school is going to make a difference in their economic situation. And I think the research that's out there shows that for low income first gen students, that's the only group where it does actually make a difference to go to suddenly have access to the halls of power that are available at some of these prestigious institutions. And so I think it's different depending on the different communities, but it is something that every college-bound kid in America has to reckon with and wrestle with right now. How do I want to even approach this process? What are my long-term goals and values? And that's a deep level of self-reflection and thinking that was not required of applying to college in prior eras.
I think one of the other reasons why I'm sympathetic to what Brennan was saying is because, let me just give you an actual example. A lot of students that I work with want to go to Duke. They just do. And they're all across the country and they want to go to Duke. And Duke's a very hard school. I have quite a few kids at Duke actually right now, but I saw what those kids had, not only in terms of ridiculous academic success, but other institutional priorities that those kids had. And Duke's just not an easy school to get into without killer performance and some being in some priority classes that Duke values. And Mike, I feel like implicit in what Brennan is saying, and part of why I'm sympathetic to a lot of what I felt like he was saying, is if the message is, okay, that's really important to you, so we just have to figure out a way to make that work, which somebody could interpret some of what you're saying as that message, by the way, because you're coming down on that's, like, hey, this is where they're at. This is where I'm sympathetic to what Brendan's saying. Most of the time, that's not going to work out. Like, when you look at schools like Brown and Dartmouth and these really competitive schools, like there's a person out there that thinks, well, I'm going to ED. That doesn't mean a lot. I mean, it means a lot in that it's a much easier admit path, but you still have to be exceptionally strong, and you're still up against double alum donors and recruited athletes and celebrities. And so my concern with the messaging of that's what you want to do, all I'm going to do is support you and let's do every single thing to make that happen, is that most of the time that doesn't end well for those students. And so they run the risk of a major mental health episode unless we can do some reframing of expectations. And I honestly think, from knowing Brennan, like that's a lot of what the motive is behind him trying to rein in the maxing. Like, it'd be one thing if it had a fairly high success rate, but it usually doesn't have a very high success rate because most applicants are hooked. They get in these places or they have resources. Now, it might mean that you get in another school other than your dream school, and that school is still socially acceptable, and and you come to love your school, and at the end of the day, you feel good. Like, that happens a lot. But do you see any truth to that? Any validity to that point I'm making?
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely have to manage expectations. Part of our role as professionals is to be able to know when a student that we're working with has a legitimate shot, like is legitimately competitive at a place like that versus when they aren't. Again, most students applying to college don't have access to people like us who can give them that kind of individualized information. But even, again, when they do, then, as you said, it can sometimes take a year and a half to get people to come to terms with the fact that they're not going to get in, right? Sometimes they have to hear it from the college themselves. And if they apply early decision to a place like that when they're not competitive, then they've squandered such a valuable piece of their application process. Right. And so there's a bit of a pressure, I think, to get them to manage those expectations by a certain time so that they can be wise with their process here. But then when there are students who are competitive, like Duke missed 5 of their students, let's say that it's only 30% of the applicant pool that's actually competitive, right? That's still 5/6 of the competitive applicants who don't get it. And so if you are one of those kids who is not a recruited athlete, is not a celebrity or celebrity kid, who doesn't have, double donor parents, all of that, what can you do to try to help yourself stand out in that pool? Some of it can be manage expectations. This is why we build a balanced list. We make sure that everyone has likelies that they actually like, that maybe we're thinking about an ED2 plan, all of that kind of stuff. But if a student is theoretically competitive for Duke and wants Duke.
Yes.
And maybe those reasons aren't just prestige, but prestige is a part of it. Then what are they to do other than
we do owe that student all the best support and our knowledge and everything we have, all the tools that we've developed to support them, while at the same time trying to get them to not expect to get in as much as possible. But there's a student, and I know the student, it could be Duke, could be Yale, could be anything. There's a student that could come to us and say, I really want to go to this school. I really like it, but I'm afraid I have no shot at getting in. There's a student that we're going to say, no, you actually do have a chance. Don't be so risk averse.
Yeah.
Because I don't want you going through the rest of your life that you never go for the job. You never start the business. So that's part of our job, to do that assessment. I don't want people to take it to the other extreme either. I just think that part of what I think Brennan is addressing is, just because you max everything out and now you're going to take 17 APs and you're going to go to this camp, you're going to that, there's a good chance that could result in a bad mental health experience.
Absolutely.
And I think that because that's what happens statistically the most. And remember, most people are just kind of doing this on their own without guidance. So they even have worse expectations than someone like you and I in their ear to give them all kinds of data. So I think from a motive standpoint, that's what he's trying to address. This has been a good conversation. I think hopefully it was helpful for people. I think we talked through it. I think you had a lot of good points. I like to think I had some good points too.
Absolutely.
And in some ways, like, you and I are like completely philosophically aligned. There's no difference whatsoever in your view and my view on this. I think we're kind of looking at a coin, and sometimes you're looking at one side of the coin and sometimes looking at the other side of the coin. Then I jump over to your side of the coin, and then you jump over to my side of the coin. And that's kind of how I see it. But I'm going to do more of this. I got some debates planned for YouTube. In fact, you and I got one coming up, and I got one with Susan coming up, and I've got one. I think it makes for good. I think it makes for good learning, right? Like hear both sides of the argument and process it, and we just want people to think through these things and then apply it in a way that can help their kid.
Yeah, my biggest goal for the students that I work with is to be intentional about the way they engage with this process so that they can feel confident at the end of the day that they put their best foot forward and, can feel comfortable with whatever the outcomes are. But it's a lot of work.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. Thanks, Carter. This is fun. All right, friends, that concludes the great debate. But if you like hearing Carter and I debate, we got another one on demonstrated interest. And we have some very different views that we express on that one. That'll be over on YouTube coming up in the next couple of weeks. But now we'll hear part 2 of my interview with Rick Barth, Understanding Clemson.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Okay, friends, we reached part 2 of the interview with Rick Barth, Director of Admissions at Clemson. In part 2, Rick explains the impact of the 2 football national championships on Clemson. Rick talks about engineering at Clemson, and especially the automotive engineering as the only program of its kind in the country. Rick talks about Clemson's bridge program with Tri-County. He describes the program and discusses the strengths and challenges of bridge. Rick discusses how Clemson is different from the University of South Carolina. And we transition and talk about admissions at Clemson. And Rick explains the big 3 factors Clemson looks for when making an admission decision. Rick explains how Clemson calculates a grade point average. Rick shares why he likes stars and why Clemson uses stars. Rick explains if Clemson looks at dual enrollment the same way they look at AP or IB. And Rick talks about how they try to account for different high schools students are coming from when they're evaluating a transcript. Listen and enjoy.
David got here about 2017, 2018. Applications were 28,000, 845, and we're at 66,500 now.
More than double. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so, he brought Common App, he brought a stronger CRM as far as Slate and so forth, and got the right people in the right seats.
Mm-hmm.
And David is just he's very insightful. He cares deeply about students in the school. He works very hard. So he makes sure he is very careful in who he hires for key positions. And so I think there was a combination of the work that David did. There was the energy that students had coming out of COVID of wanting to travel and wanting to go further away from home. So, you look at that fall of 2020, Clemson was at 28,596. As I mentioned, we're now at 66,500. The biggest jump was that 20 to 21, 47,069. So I think it was a combination of David coming in and modernizing the admissions office, and then the energy that students had coming out of COVID. I really think those were the 2 things. And then, as you've mentioned, when you get to this campus, you just feel really good. I mean, that's what got me here. I had the same experience a student had. When I interviewed, I did the tour. I was laughing and joking. People were nice. This campus has a great feel. You can feel the energy of our students. You can tell our energy, our students love it here. So part of those numbers are students going back into their communities and talking about their experiences. And that's been a big part of this growth because we are outgunned when it comes to the number of positions. I have 12 recruiters compared to some of, other places I've worked where I had 38 out-of-state recruiters alone.
Sounds like Alabama right there.
Yes. So I do think that's a big part of our success. And everybody says they have a great alumni network. Clemson has an amazing alumni network. Our Board of Visitors is one of our alumni groups, and they're individuals. Majority are alumni, but they also give back to the university in a number of ways. I cannot tell you how many Board of Visitor members call me on my cell phone every year to tell me about students. And it's nothing I've experienced anywhere else as far as the volume of our alumni caring about the school, reaching out in their home communities, encouraging students to reach out to us and us to reach out to students. So I do think I think there's a number of inputs on this, but I do think those are some of the key ones.
2 national championships in football doesn't hurt. What role do you think fun fraternities in football played in your out-of-state growth?
Well, those championships were during that period when the applications were around 28, 29,000. So I think it raised awareness of Clemson. I think there are people around the country that probably did not know Clemson was in South Carolina, probably did not know that Clemson was a public university, especially folks on the West Coast. So I think it helped build that awareness foundation. We did not see that turn into applications right away. I think any of your campuses that have active student organizations, that is a draw to students. Our Greek life numbers are modest compared to a lot of schools. We're about 25% of our students participate in a fraternity or sorority. So while I think that is a draw for some students, I do not think that it has the impact that it has somewhere such as an Ole Miss, for example.
Sure. Yeah. Ole Miss is. And Alabama, that's a very strong fraternity cultures at those schools. Talk to me about engineering, because it's the first major I think of when I think of Clemson, and I feel like that's historical, right? Like 100 years ago, Clemson had strong engineering. I know you've got these connections in automotive, like the whole Up 85's got all of these different growth of the automotive industry, and I'm told by credible sources like Clemson has incredible connections into those jobs. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, engineering, as you say, is one of the colleges we're known for. What I like about engineering, I've kind of touched on it, they truly want to grow and they truly want to provide the best student experience that a student can have. I love what they do the first year as far as working with students to make sure they know what they want to do. A lot of times a student may think that they want to be an automotive engineer, but, in reality, they want to do, mechanical engineering. And so just that guidance they provide, I think, is very important. It is the only automotive undergrad engineering degree in the country. And as you referenced, you do your first couple years here on campus, and then we have an automotive engineering campus up in Greenville. We have students that do internships with BMW, with a number of parts suppliers and things like that. And so that work integrated learning, those co-ops, those practicums, those internships, is something that they spend a lot of time with their students on, making sure the students understand the importance of that. And they do a great job as far as making sure their students graduate. Engineering's a difficult road. There's no doubt about it from an academic standpoint. I've worked at other places where the faculty of the engineering is, sink or swim. And that's not the philosophy here. Our dean will go out and recruit with us if we ask him to. His staff meets with us quarterly. They meet with us more than any other college meets with us. So that kind of shows you the concern they have. And obviously, they are trying to figure things out. As you probably are aware, computer science as a major is in a decline nationwide.
Yes. And
so a lot of universities have built a lot of, resources around their computer science programs. So you cannot just disband them. Mm-hmm. So what I appreciate about our engineering is they're looking at, what are the type of learning that goes on in computer science that can be applied to artificial intelligence, that can be applied to cybersecurity. What are the paths we can create to make our students more marketable while also retaining the resources we have as a college? So I appreciate the fact that they're forward thinking and that they are committed to not just the college success, but the university success. But the thing that I really appreciate about them, the two things, is working with their students the first year to make sure they truly know what they want to do, and the work integrated learning opportunities that they provide their students during their time with us.
Rick, the thing that, I don't know if I want to use the word most impressed, but I'll say was the most, educational new learning opportunity for me that I didn't realize about Clemson was how you have your partnership with a community college that's like right there. And then students can even stay in the dorm, stay in the dorms, and how you provide a pathway from the community college right into Clemson University. It's kind of unique the way you do it, and you do it in a way that's really appealing. It'd be very attractive to a lot of students. Can you elaborate on that? Because if I didn't know it before, my sense is a lot of our listeners probably didn't know it before. So can you unpack that?
Yes, we call it our Bridge program, and you're correct. It's with our local 2-year sister institution, Tri-County. And students, there are 3 paths to Clemson, Mark. There's a fall admit, there's a summer admit, and then there's bridge. Through early action, we only do fall admits. And then during the regular decision process, we do the fall admit, summer admit, and then bridge. So bridge is the third path to Clemson. And students, if they accept the bridge offer, as you say, they live in our residence halls, they participate in student activities, but they take their classes at Tri-County. And if they complete 30 academic hours with a 2.5, they, quote, cross the bridge, and they become Clemson students their sophomore year. Many of my recruiters in my 4 years I've been here, I say many, two now, one has rotated out, came to Clemson through bridge. So I often have them talk about it if they're traveling with me at a program. And it has been very successful. Of the 1,000 students that we may have start bridge, about 880 will cross the bridge and come to Clemson. And their graduation rate is not that far off than the graduation rates that I listed earlier. That it's very close. So it is a program we're proud of. It's a program that sometimes families will hear their child gets bridge and they get very upset. Fortunately, it's been around long enough now that if I am like in an auditorium doing a parent program at night, and somebody is speaking of it in a derogatory way, typically there's a parent that'll raise their hand and stand up and said, wait a minute, I understand, but my child went through bridge and they really enjoyed it. They've graduated, we would do it all over again. So as there's still some concern out there among families whose students gets bridge, we're seeing a lot more parents come to our defense saying it was a really good program for my child. If you want to be at Clemson, it is a good path. It has been effective to the point that we've had other institutions come and visit us on campus and view it, talk to us about how did you do this, how do you do that. And it is also a work in progress. And what do I mean by that? Is we are constantly looking at ways to make it more seamless because you do have two separate institutions and student data is going back and forth. So even from the period I've been here, we've gone from printed transcripts being run back to Clemson after that first year at Tri-County to, digital feeds and always improving on those digital feeds to try to take the work off the families as far as once they do transfer into Clemson, making sure everything goes smoothly. The only caveat I have about bridge is, and this is not a Clemson decision, this is the national organization's decision. You cannot rush a national fraternity or sorority as a bridge student. Does not mean that the bridge students cannot go Greek, especially for the men. What ends up happening is the fraternities, for lack of a better word, they continue to rush them the entire first year and try to get them, to become new members their second year. And many of our sororities, not all of them, but many of them will do the same thing. So it's kind of a longer recruiting process in that aspect, but they cannot become a new member of a fraternity or sorority their bridge year. That's really been the only negative that I've experienced.
Yeah, but the opportunity to live in the dorms and be completely sort of socially integrated, to be able to participate in campus facilities and resources and events, I mean, that just has to make the transition so much more seamless than somebody who's coming from the outside. And I'm assuming there's tight articulation agreements with credits transferring over and all that stuff's been worked out so that you don't have some of the issues that students have when they move outside of their own system.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. That's one of the strengths is that the advisors, know exactly what Clemson expects. Clemson understands what Tri-County can offer, and they are admitted to bridge by the major that they are admitted to at Clemson. And so that way, if that student is still interested in that major, Tri-County can keep them on track for the courses they're supposed to have. So you're exactly right on that point.
So I have a hard question for you, and it's one that I probably asked 15 students. How is Clemson different from the University of South Carolina?
I think this brings up an excellent point of why families should tour campus. Clemson is a much more traditional college town. The university is the city. And so for students that are looking for that traditional, college experience, I think Clemson, is the right call. University of South Carolina, being in Columbia, has a much more metro feel to it. It has opportunities as far as government and those type of things. So it's also a different environment as far as the type of activities that students can engage in. Coming from out of state, I have no sense of the rivalry between the two schools, and I am very close with my colleagues at the University of South Carolina, two dear friends that work there, and my colleague, my peer, as far as the job I do, has been very helpful to me during the 4 years here. So I do not want to say anything negative about the school. They are very different. And it is very important that students tour campus, because some students will tour USC and fall in love with it, fall in love with how it is surrounded by the city and the opportunities that provide. Some students will not like it. Some students will come to Clemson and they will love the traditional college feel. Other students will come and, having no metro vibe, will not like the sense they get here. So I think that's why it's critically important that students do visit, get their choices down to 2 or 3 choices and visit those campuses, because they do. Both campuses have great academic programs. And, I have sent so many students to their nursing program that did not get into Clemson, so I have nothing negative to say. I think it's a great school. But the campuses are very different. They just are. And I do think that's why it's important for students to visit and get a sense for which campus they'd be most comfortable at.
Speaking of your nursing program, I have a student from Southern Ohio who's in your nursing program and loving it. And the direct admit was really appealing, played a big role in that selection. Let's talk about admissions. So walk us through criteria that are used and not used in evaluating an application.
Sure. The big 3 for Clemson is a student's GPA, their rank, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And if they submit a test, the test score. Tied into that is the rigor of the courses that they took, the units that they took, the path that they took in taking those classes, and so forth. So those are the primary inputs. So let's talk about those a little bit. As far as what we're talking about, with the GPA on a 4.0 scale, weighted GPA, our median's about a 4.3. And so
I have to follow up on that, because
sure,
there's so many different rating scales. Some give a full point for AP and a half a point for honors, and there's all kinds of variations. So when people hear a number, it can mean very different things to them if they're coming from, different ranking systems with different weighting systems. So what you want to share that a little bit, because it makes the 4.3 have more context.
Sure. You actually hit our scale. So if you're talking AP or IB, you're talking about a full point. If you're talking an honors classification, you're talking a half point. We do have students self-report what used to be called SHRARs. It's now called STARS. Mm-hmm. So that does the data manipulation for us. And I often get the questions, Mark, from college counselors, the self-report is really causing problems. It's really difficult. I understand that. It's, I've grown to like the tool more because of what it can do for us as far as breaking the data down. But the reason for that is what I mentioned earlier about the size of my team. We're getting 66,000 applications. My operations team is 4 people. If we did not use STARS, you would not get a decision regardless of when you applied for several months. And so that's not a situation we wanted to put families in either. So that's kind of our scale. I get the question, do you prefer dual enrollment or AP? That's a very difficult question, but my committee has 120 years experience between them, the 5 people on my committee, and they want to see the AP. The dual enrollment's great. Don't get me wrong, but they want to see the AP courses. They want to see that students have challenged themselves in that, because there's no consistency, as we know, across the board nationwide, but there is more consistency with the AP courses than there is with the dual enrollment as far as the quality of the teaching. It's just more consistent. And so that is why we have that preference. So that's what goes into that 4.3.
Does the dual enrollment get any points? Is it treated as honors? How's it treated?
The dual enrollment, depending on how the student puts it into the STARS, if they put it in as an honors course, they'll get the 0.5. Otherwise, it is just the unweighted 4.0 scale. The other thing I was going to say to give this some context is, some schools will look at the AP test score as far as having weight in the admissions process. We do not. We look at the grade of the AP course itself.
As opposed to AP score. Yeah. So this is a question from one of our co-hosts I reached out to, because she'd been a little confused by decision-making from Clemson. And so I asked her to write verbatim so I could read it. I want to accurately convey the question because she's not here. So I'm going to read it. I asked the other co-hosts, because I reached out to the co-hosts and I said, does anybody have any questions for me about Clemson? I'm going into this interview here with Rick. And while Julia Esquivel is currently on sabbatical and not on the pod, currently she has been a school-based counselor at 3 independent schools in the Boston area. All of the 3, she saw drastically different results on what would be considered equally qualified students. 2 of the schools had traditional A through F grades. 1 had a different GPA scale. All 3 didn't offer the traditional slate of honors and AP courses. At a college that uses the STAR, how do you take into account different curricula and GPA to be able to accurately compare students? And then she also said, and I could share this, when she worked at Milton Academy, sometimes most of the students were not accepted at Clemson, and those would be students with A- averages, maybe a few Bs, high testing. At other schools that had students in like the 9th decile, far below the academic achievement of the Milton students, they would all get in.
Yeah. And, without knowing those individual cases, it's hard for me to comment on that. We do, and STARS helps us do this. So I was kind of surprised by that statement. We do equalize everyone down to a 4.0 scale before it gets to the committee. I get this concern a lot locally, as you can imagine, from our in-state schools. And every time I look into it, I'd say 90% of the time, it's just a difference of major. Since we do admit by major, it's very hard for people to understand that.
Mm-hmm.
While business wants a large number of students, it's still very competitive because of the reputation of our College of Business. And so, a lot of times we will see where someone has a very strong profile and they'll either get a bridge offer or they will get denied and they get very upset. And, part of that is really based on what major that student's interested in. Again, without having the knowledge of those individuals, it's hard for me to comment on that. What we try to do to prevent that, our last review by the committee is within the school itself. And so we lay out everyone that's been admitted from that high school, and we see, is there anything here we could not justify if that college counselor calls us? We do that for a number of reasons. We cannot account for grade inflation. I get, mainly from independent schools. I get, well, how can you compare our students to the same students at the local public institution? Well, I think that's an unfair comment to students at the public institution. Number of public institutions around the country I'll put up against any independent school. But the way we control for that is we do then look at the students based from the school they have applied versus how they look among their peers, who got what path to Clemson or did not get a path to Clemson. And is that consistent within that school so that we can at least have these type of conversations when a school counselor does call me or calls one of my team members to talk about it?
Can I follow up on that? Because so there's been a movement for some time, really going back at least to 99, but it's been growing, where independent schools are moving away from the AP curriculum and teaching their own classes internally, and the students don't take APs. Is it possible that's some of the confusion? Because it sounds like the way you talked about the weighting, it'd be impossible in that system, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just trying to accurately get a read, for a student to get that full 1 point weighting because there's no AP or IB. And even if they called it advanced or honors, they're kind of capping out at the 0.5. Is it possible that might play a role in producing a lower weighted GPA in the system?
Where that could produce a role is if it is a school that does not have a history of sending students to Clemson. It's like somewhere like Wesleyan in Atlanta has been sending Clemson students for decades.
Yes.
So if Wesleyan was to do that, we already have a kicker built in because we know that the Wesleyan students, when they come to Clemson, graduate at a much higher rate than the population, which is already graduating at a very high rate. Sure. And so we account for it if we have a history of that school. If we do not have a history of that school and there's not a large number of students in the past that have applied from that school, yes, it could hurt them. I'll be completely transparent because if they're not getting, the weight that they would get. Now, if they are a strong student and they have gotten, say, an engineering student is my easiest example. Engineering wants to see a student has gotten to Calculus 1 or can step on campus day one into Calculus 1. So, you see the AP Calculus AB course, that's going to look good. You see a calculus course, honors calculus course at an independent school that has a good reputation, that's going to help that student. It's not going to hurt them, so to speak. So there is still that review going on.
Friends, this includes this part of our interview with Rick Barth, Director of Admission at Clemson University. We hope you join us in our next episode for the next part. All right, friends, what's up on our next episode? Well, we've got a question from a listener that Christina will join me to answer. And then we'll have part 3 of Understanding Clemson. And friends, remember, it's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's what you do when you get there. It's what you do when you get out of there. That is what's going to determine your level of career success. See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us, and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about YCBK on social media, and you help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating at yourcollegeboundkid.com and clicking the donate button. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. If you have a question or suggestion, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button and speak, and we will do our best to get your question or your comment in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I'm the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admission and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-host, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, 2 admission officers from Colorado, Hillary Dickman from Colorado College, Kate Strickland from CU Boulder, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Esquivel in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, Heath Einstein, the Chief Enrollment Officer at TCU in Fort Worth, Carter DeLauro, a co-director of college counseling in New York, and Christina Lopez, the former Dean of Admission at Barnard College, and our international college specialist, Kevin Newton from Dallas, Texas. Our stupendous sound engineer who makes everything happen is Nemanja Matvic from Serbia. Our reliable webmaster is John Rooney. Website updates are done by Joy Stucker. Image editing by Vlad Honchar. And what would we do without our volunteers? Guy Pillsbury, Sony Patel, and Andy Bernstein are all helping us with podcast marketing. Carolyn Wood, Mark Doniger, and Carrie Roberts book interviews with thought leaders. Amanda Dugan, Colleen Sinoki, Nicole Resch, Trevor Smith, Ryan Stepler, and Lynn Labash send thank yous to interviewees. If you want a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly newsletter, YCBK Plus, it's also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights and our upcoming events and receptions. And you can now do searches for past content by using our new Explore and Topics tabs. We really encourage you to explore our past content. We have close to 1,000 hours. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.